Good evening. The SADC Election Observer Mission to South Africa will meet with the Minister of Police, Bheki Cele, tomorrow to gain clarity on security issues for the upcoming polls. The mission's raised concerns about the recent reports of xenophobic attacks in some parts of the country.
The eyes and the ears for SADC during the elections in South Africa next week. The mission says it will deploy observers in all 9 provinces. But the numbers are a challenge.
The SADC Electoral Observation Mission, SIOM, to the 2019 national and provincial elections consists in total of 48 personnel from 10 SADC member states, namely Angola, Botswana, Democratic Republic of Congo, Lesotho, Malawi, Mozambique, Namibia, Tanzania, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. Our observers will be deployed to all the 9 provinces of South Africa, namely Eastern Cape, Free State, Gauteng, KwaZulu-Natal, Limpopo, Mpumalanga, Northern Cape, Northwest, and Western Cape.
The other thorny issue is safety and security.
We are equally having members of our mission who are not willing at the moment to go and render their services in the areas which are prone to xenophobic attacks. We are, of course, going to have meeting. We are going to have engagements with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs here and other stakeholders, police service inclusive, to make sure that there's adequate security to our observers, because we cannot be hindered to do our service because of this vice.
The team will hold talks with political parties and the representatives of the police on Tuesday. Sophie Mukwena, SABC News, Pretoria.
And Zambia's Foreign Minister Joseph Malanji joins me now. He speaks as head of the SADC Electoral Observer Mission here in South Africa. Very good evening, and thank you so much for speaking to us, Minister. So let's first start with the concerns that you've expressed about incidents of violence, xenophobic violence you've seen previously. What are you hoping to hear from South Africa's Safety Minister?
Thank you very much. First of all, allow me to commiserate with South Africa on the calamities that we've experienced in KwaZulu-Natal, particularly in Durban. And of course, I would take advantage of this time to commiserate with other members of SADC that have had similar calamities, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and Malawi. Yes. Tomorrow we're scheduled to meet the head of police service in the morning as the head of mission, and of course with part of my group. This is because of the concerns that have come from some of the members of the mission fearing to go into some areas that are declared to be prone to xenophobic attacks. So, of course, like I indicated earlier on, we cannot be hindered to render a service because of few individuals that have turned to crime. So we are meeting the police service to make sure that they give them adequate security as they execute their services as mission observers.
Mm-hmm. And these concerns obviously will be born out of reports seen in the past coming out of South Africa. Having been in South Africa before and being in South Africa now, do your members not consider these isolated, localized incidents? Do they consider them widespread enough that they might be randomly attacked?
Well, they could be localized or whatever angle you might pick. When it goes to the outside world, it's one and the same. Because, of course, there are countries that have been affected, which are in the SADC region, and, of course, they've done a formal démarche to the South African government. And the only consoling thing is that the South African government has given assurance that it is going to make sure that they punish all would-be and other perpetrators of this vice. But in a nutshell, even these undesirable elements, they've got to realize that we're a global village now. South Africa, to start with, cannot be isolated to the rest of the region.
So let's talk about your observer mission. You obviously unveiled it today as SADC, but have you had long-term observers? If so, how long have they been here?
Well, of course, initially we sent a SIAC group that came to do preliminary investigations on the ground to see how much preparations were being done to the upcoming elections. And then thereafter, that's when we now sent in the SIOM team of observers, which is headed by me. So we're actually launching it today. And with effect from today, we'll be having meetings with other stakeholders relating to this coming election, so that we actually have all the necessary information that we need to have at the mission. So
obviously the role of your mission that had been here before was to give you a lay of the land. Now, with over 20,000 polling stations, have you got a map that's outlined as to where your observer missions will go, given the fact that it's just short of 50, the number?
Yes, it's just short of 50. We've got 48 members in our observer team. But what I would like to make known to you is that we collaborate with other observers missions. And also, primarily, we've made sure that these numbers that have come here are put in areas where we've got high catchment areas. So that at least we have a pattern which is going to give us an informative pattern of the results.
And it's important that I ask you to clarify this, because as you know, as SADC, some of your observer missions in the past, and that would include other observer missions or whether internal, international, who've observed elections with you. I'm thinking of Mozambique at some point where there was a complaint that there wasn't enough of SADC observer missions who were seen, and your statements on the outcomes of the elections are then questioned.
Of course, each and every person are entitled to have their own opinion, but we are talking facts here. And when we say we are sending observers to ABCD place, we mean just that. And the information that they bring to the Secretariat is quite pragmatic, because not only do we engage stakeholders, being the electorates and the other political parties, we also engage the systems of the government to make sure that all that information which we get is accurate for submission.
So perhaps then just share with the South African audience what the objectives of your observer missions are, in terms of what is also stipulated and what you can or cannot do. And I'm thinking of examples of elections in Zimbabwe where past observer missions have been criticized again on their findings of their elections, on whether there's been freeness or fairness thereof. But if you could perhaps share with us what it is that you'll be doing then over the next couple of days, so that people understand what your role will be.
Our major objective as an observer, one, we've got to make sure that there is an independent electoral commission. We've got to make sure that we see their legal framework, political stability, and the social status of the country. Those are cardinal factors that we've got to look at before we call any election good or bad. And having had said that, you see, it is not one size fits all. SADC has observed all elections for South Africa since 1994. So you must realize that there is institutional memory to the pattern of elections.
But there are also SADC protocols, and I'm going to reflect back on the elections of the Democratic Republic of Congo, for instance, when there were some member states that wanted there to be a recount of their results, of those results, but then there was a final decision by SADC to say that you're satisfied with the outcome thereof. Is there a sense maybe that you being judged as being too lenient towards certain administrations within the SADC region?
There would be no point at which one can claim that we're being lenient to any of the member states. You see, like I've said, you've got to look at what is obtaining. When you look at Congo DRC, this is a country that has had only 3 elections for the past 60 years. So, and when you look at how the election itself was, there were people that were disfranchised in that election that you would have nobody to blame for because it was an act of force majeure. There was a Ebola virus in 3 of the provinces. Meaning all those people were all being equal were supposed to have taken part in the elections, but they couldn't because of that. So, however, there had been no time when a country in the SADC has demanded for recount of the elections. So we are looking at this. We were looking at the situation now which was obtaining in Congo, and merely an advice that if they could find a provision for dialogue between the victor and other stakeholders.
So let's reflect on South Africa. From the findings of your earlier observer mission, have they highlighted areas of concern other than what you mentioned earlier on that may be red flags that may affect the freeness and fairness of South African elections?
Of course, there were questions coming out when we were launching the mission today, that what would happen in case the calamities that are happening in KwaZulu-Natal could reoccur in other areas. What would happen if people in those areas don't vote? But our advice was we can't cross the bridge before we get there. In any given chance, whatever you sign, there must be an exit clause. This is an election that is provided for, and I must say that as SADC head of mission, we are quite happy with what the Electoral Commission has done so far. You've got about 26.7 million people that have been registered for this election. So ultimately, you are clear that it's a good share of the majority that will be making a decision.
Thank you.
Those concerns are neither here nor there.
Thank you so much for speaking to us. Zambia's Foreign Minister and also head of SADC Electoral Observer Mission, Joseph Malanji, will be back shortly after this break.